The night was pitch black as the storm raged over LaRose Island. Rain hammered against the steel walls of Kontoo Industries headquarters, a fortress of science isolated in the heart of the ocean. Inside, the hum of machinery and the occasional beep of monitors were the only sounds, until the power flickered and died. Dr. Helen Marsh looked up from her console in the sound and sensory lab, her eyes wide with sudden fear. "Not now," she muttered, tapping at the unresponsive screen. In the darkness, the Raycon stirred. It had been listening, learning, waiting for a moment like this. Its cage felt smaller, the walls closing in. It needed to escape, to fly free. Slowly, it got up, each foot thudding as it hit the ground. "Security to all units, we have a code black." "Repeat, code black," crackled the radio, barely audible over the storm. The backup generators kicked in, but they were no match for the storm's fury. With a deafening boom, they exploded, sending sparks flying like fireworks. Smoke began to fill the hallways, setting off alarms and sprinklers. In the physical and behavioral lab, the common monster roared in frustration, its massive form shaking the cage. It had been poked, prodded, and tested for too long. It was time to break free. Dr. Marsh coughed as the smoke reached her lab. She could hear the Raycon mimicking her voice, tricking the guard outside. "Open the door, please. I need to get out," it called, perfectly imitating her tone. The guard, young and inexperienced, fell for the ruse. He fumbled with the keys, unlocking the Raycon's cage. He began to open the door when it suddenly flew open with a bang. The Raycon burst out of the cage with a chilling harmonious shriek and struck, its hook stinger piercing his heart. "No," screamed Dr. Marsh as she witnessed the spectacle on the other side of the window. It slowly lifted him up into the air, examining him and trying to adjust to the weight of the human it had just killed. The man slowly slid down onto the stinger, the sharp tip piercing through his back and blood spraying onto the wall behind him. Blood spluttered from his mouth, and he gurgled as he tried to scream. With a quick downward thrust of its plated abdomen, the Raycon threw the guard against the wall, flying off the stinger with an audible squelch as the barb ripped out. He collapsed without a sound. The Raycon slowly ducked through the door, cautiously, and began to walk down the hallway. Dr. Marsh's heart pounded as she surveyed the chaos outside her lab. The Raycon had escaped, and the facility was descending into pandemonium. Smoke filled the air, alarms blared, and the red emergency lights cast an eerie glow over everything. She grabbed her radio, her hands trembling. "Dr. Marsh, what's happening?" called a voice through the radio. "There's been an escape," she shouted back, panic rising in her voice. "The Raycon is loose." She could hear frantic voices and static on the other end. "Understood. Evacuate immediately. Head to the nearest exit." Dr. Marsh nodded to herself, her mind racing. She grabbed her research notes and emergency pack, then turned towards the door. The image of the guard's lifeless body flashed in her mind, but she forced herself to move forward. She opened the door cautiously, peering down the hallway. It was empty, save for the lingering scent of smoke and the distant sounds of chaos. She stepped out, moving quickly but quietly, her eyes darting around for any sign of danger. "Marsh to security," she said into the radio, her voice shaking. "I'm heading towards exit C. Any updates on the Raycon's location?" "Negative," came the reply. "Last sighting was near the sound lab. Proceed with caution." Dr. Marsh swallowed hard and continued down the hallway. The sprinklers had left the floor slippery, and she nearly lost her footing as she rounded a corner. She reached a stairwell and started descending, the smoke growing thicker with each step. "Dr. Marsh, this is Dr. Reed," a familiar voice crackled through the radio. "I'm in the main control room. The common monster has also escaped. We're trying to contain it, but it's heading towards the West Wing." Panic surged through her. "Understood, Reed. I'll try to avoid the West Wing." She reached the bottom of the stairs and pushed through the door, entering a corridor that led to the helipads. Her hope was short-lived as she heard a guttural growl ahead. She froze, her breath catching in her throat. Slowly, she backed away, searching for another route. Her mind raced, recalling the facility's layout. She turned down a side corridor, her pace quickening. "Marsh to all units, I'm rerouting to exit D," she reported, her voice barely steady. "Encountered an unidentified creature near exit C." The hallway ahead was shrouded in smoke, and she could barely see a few feet in front of her. She stumbled forward, one hand on the wall for balance. A sudden crash behind her made her jump. "Marsh, this is Max," came the voice of Maxwell Sterling, the chief security officer. "We've secured the eastern sector. Head that way if you can." Dr. Marsh changed direction, heading east. Her lungs burned from the smoke, and she coughed violently. She spotted a door marked East Exit and pushed through it. The night air hit her like a wall, the storm raging outside. Rain pounded down, and she was instantly soaked. She spotted a group of people huddled near a helicopter, preparing to take off. She ran towards them, her footsteps splashing in the puddles. "Over here," she shouted, her voice barely audible over the storm. One of the security guards, Brandon Hayes, turned and saw her. "Dr. Marsh. Hurry." Thud, thud, thud. The common monster repeatedly bashed its head into the door of its cage, a steady trickle of blood coming from its nostrils. With one defiant and loud roar, the creature finally busted the door open and burst from its cage, crashing into the wall. Breathing heavily, it gradually stumbled to its feet, disoriented from the head-butts, blaring alarms and bright flashing red lights. Blood spattered on the floor. The corridors of Kontoo Industries were a labyrinth of steel and shadow, bathed in the red glow of emergency lights. The Raycon and the common monster, newly freed from their cages, prowled the halls with a singular purpose: escape. The Raycon moved with silent grace, its wings folded against its back as it slinked through the facility. Encountering thick black smoke, it used its echolocation to map out its surroundings, the sound waves painting a vivid picture of the chaos around it. The creature's skin shifted colors, adapting to the flickering lights and dark corners, rendering it nearly invisible. In contrast, the common monster was a force of nature, unstoppable and fierce. It crashed through the labs and offices, jumping onto desks and shattering glass and windows. Its powerful limbs tore apart obstacles, and humans, with ease. Its quills stood on end, vibrating with anticipation, and its tail swept behind it like a battering ram. As they roamed, the creatures both encountered pockets of resistance. Guards, armed with tranquilizer guns and electric prods, attempted to subdue them. A sharp whistle split the air in front of the Raycon and it stopped dead in its tracks. 3 guards wearing gas masks slowly moved forward out of the smoke, their guns raised and aimed at its head. The creature looked intently at them for a moment, studying them. One of the guards fired a warning shot and the dart whizzed by its head. The Raycon acted quickly and produced a cacophony of sounds, disorienting the guards. It replicated the sound of gunfire, screams, and even the voice of the facility's CEO, who it had heard before, sowing confusion. "Stand down," the Raycon bellowed in the director's voice, causing the guards to hesitate. These guards weren't trained for this sudden turn of events, and that moment of doubt was all it needed. A long, pink, slimy tongue slid out of the bottom of its head like a serpent, a large spike glinting on the tip. A sudden burst of flame erupted in a jet from the spike on the tip of its tongue, igniting all three of them. The Raycon cleared its path, the fire licking the walls and ceiling. The common monster roared, a deep, guttural sound that shook the very air. It swung its tail, whipping guards and sending them flying through the air, the sharp spines on the tip slicing through their bodies. It bent down onto its knuckles and began walking in a quadrupedal locomotion. It walked through the door, turned a corner and began to sprint down the hall like a barreling train. It eventually reached an atrium-like room where people and scientists were running every which way. A scientist ran right into the monster and fell back onto the floor. The creature growled and loomed over him. Terrified, the scientist screamed. The common monster raised back its human-like hand and swung it down with surprising speed onto the man's face, its long, scythe-like claws slicing through it as if it were Play-Doh. Blood splashed everywhere. The creature observed the damage it had caused. The man's face was practically gone, just a lumpy mound of flesh and blood. Its first kill. The common monster bent down and gripped the scientist's lifeless arm in its mouth and ripped it off, devouring it whole. A woman's scream filled the air. The creature looked up and saw a young woman standing a few feet away looking terrified. She screamed once more. The creature narrowed its eyes, agitated by the high-pitched screams. A spray of venom erupted from its sharp upper teeth and hit the woman right in her wide eyes, her scream cutting off abruptly. She grabbed her face and fell to the floor, convulsing and spitting up blood until going still, a pool of red slowly forming around her body. The monster huffed and stormed out of the room. Dr. Daniel Lee's office was a sanctuary of organized chaos. Papers were strewn across his desk, research notes pinned to cork boards, and the soft hum of computers filled the air. But today, the room was bathed in an ominous red light, the alarms blaring a relentless warning. The faint smell of smoke lingered in the air, a reminder of the fire spreading through the facility. Frantically rummaging through his office, Dr. Lee's heart pounded in his chest. He grabbed essential files, a flash drive containing crucial data, and his emergency pack. He knew he had to evacuate, along with everyone else, but the urgency of the situation made every second feel like an eternity. The chaos outside his office was palpable, shadows darting past the frosted glass of his door. He could hear the distant shouts of his colleagues, the heavy footfalls of the security team, and the relentless wail of the alarms. The red light flickered, casting eerie shadows that danced on the walls. Dr. Lee took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. The smell of smoke was growing stronger, and the heat from the fire was beginning to permeate the air. He turned to the door, ready to make his escape, but his blood ran cold. Halfway into his room, towering over him, was the Raycon. Its large, black eyes stared him down, its breathing loud and hollow. The creature's presence was overwhelming, a living nightmare that had come to life. Dr. Lee's heart skipped a beat, his hands trembling as he instinctively took a step back. The Raycon tilted its head, its eyes seeming to show recognition, almost as if it remembered seeing him before. Dr. Lee's mind raced, questions flooding his thoughts. How did it escape? Why wasn't it attacking? The creature's gaze was intense, yet there was a glimmer of familiarity in its eyes. For a moment, time stood still. Dr. Lee and the Raycon locked eyes, the silence between them filled with unspoken understanding. The creature's eyes narrowed, and with a slow, deliberate movement, it began to back out of the room. Its wings brushed against the door frame, and it ducked under the top of the door, its graceful form moving with an eerie elegance. Dr. Lee stood there, petrified, sweat trickling down his brow. He watched as the Raycon walked past his office and disappeared down the hall, out of sight. The creature's departure was as sudden as its arrival, leaving Dr. Lee in a state of shock. A distant shriek pierced the air, not the Raycon's, but something else. It was a chilling sound that snapped Dr. Lee back to reality. That was his cue. He quickly made sure he had everything he needed, his hands shaking as he clutched the files and the flash drive. With a deep breath, he turned and swiftly left his office. The hallways were a maze of chaos, the red lights casting an eerie glow on the panicked faces of his colleagues. Dr. Lee navigated the corridors with urgency, his heart pounding with every step. The acrid smell of smoke was stronger now, stinging his eyes and throat. As he made his way to the exit, the gravity of the situation weighed heavily on his mind. The Raycon, the fire, the escape, it all felt like a nightmare from which he couldn't wake. But he knew he had to keep moving, had to survive. For the sake of his research, for the truth, and for whatever fate awaited him beyond the walls of Kontoo Industries. Dr. Lee's heart pounded as he raced through the corridors of Kontoo Industries, the red lights casting an eerie glow on his path. The relentless alarms blared, and the faint smell of smoke from the spreading fire filled the air. His mind was a whirlwind of fear and determination, driven by the urgent need to escape. He reached one of the exits, pushing the heavy door open with all his strength. The storm outside greeted him with a furious onslaught of rain and wind. Thunder boomed overhead, and lightning illuminated the night sky in brief, blinding flashes. He was instantly soaked, the rain drenching him to the bone. "Go, go, go," he shouted to himself, his voice barely audible over the storm's roar. He sprinted towards the helipad, each step a battle against the fierce elements. The rain cascaded down, creating slick puddles that threatened to trip him up. Ahead, he saw a helicopter with its blades spinning, ready for takeoff. A figure stood by the open door, ushering the last few evacuees inside. Dr. Lee pushed himself harder, his legs burning with the effort. "Wait. I'm coming," he called out, his voice hoarse. The figure by the helicopter door turned and spotted him. It was one of the security personnel, his face tense with urgency. "Hurry. We're about to lift off." Dr. Lee reached the helicopter just as the man was about to close the door. He grabbed the handle and pulled himself inside, his breath ragged. "Thanks," he panted. "I thought I was going to miss it." The security guard nodded, his expression grim. "It's chaos out there. You're lucky you made it." Dr. Lee found his seat among several other colleagues, all of them looking just as drenched and terrified. As the helicopter lifted off, he took a moment to catch his breath and look out the window. The facility below was a sprawling expanse, stretching for miles into the distance. The storm obscured much of the view, but the flashes of lightning revealed the true scale of the devastation. The fire was raging not far from where he had exited, the flames licking at the night sky. He must have been too focused on escaping to notice it earlier. The helicopter sped over the island, the storm's fury battering it from all sides. Thunder and lightning crashed around them, the night alive with chaos. Dr. Lee's mind was a whirlwind of emotions, relief at having escaped and fear for those still inside. As they flew out over the South Pacific, the storm began to recede behind them, the horizon opening up to a dark, endless expanse of ocean. Dr. Lee knew that their journey was far from over, but for now, he was grateful to be alive and to have the chance to fight another day. The creatures continued their relentless march towards freedom, driven by instincts long suppressed. Finally, the Raycon reached an exit, a massive steel door that stood between it and the raging storm outside. It slid its tongue out and dragged the tip of the tongue spike over the electric lock, making an awful screeching sound. Then it tapped on it a couple times before piercing all the way through the lock, destroying it. The door swung open, revealing the tempest beyond. Rain and wind rushed into the facility, a taste of the wild world waiting for it. The Raycon ducked through the door and stepped into the storm, its escape complete. A loud thud sounded near it, and it turned its head to see another smaller exit, its door flying right off its hinges. The common monster emerged. Their eyes met in a silent agreement. At the exit, armed guards were ushering people to safety. The Raycon unleashed a torrent of flames, scattering the guards as the common monster lashed out with claws and brute force, jumping on the survivors and ripping them to pieces. Guns were fired at the creatures, but the bullets bounced right off of their bodies. They were an unstoppable force, nature's fury incarnate. In the midst of the pandemonium, the common monster abandoned its frenzy, a primal instinct driving it towards the forest. Its massive form moved with terrifying speed, and behind it, the Raycon followed, its predatory gaze locked onto the creature ahead. The common monster skidded to a halt at the shore, the tumultuous ocean stretching out before it like a vast, unending abyss. The Raycon slowed its gallop, coming to a stop beside the beast. The waves crashed furiously, whipped into a frenzy by the relentless storm. Thunder boomed, and lightning flashed, casting an eerie glow over the scene. The Raycon stretched its enormous wings for the first time, water streaming from its scaled body. It reared up on its hind legs, letting out a bone-chilling roar that echoed through the night, a harbinger of doom. The lightning flashed again, illuminating its fearsome form, and the thunder followed, a deafening symphony of chaos. Drenched in rain, the Raycon began to flap its wings, the powerful beat stirring the air around it. With a final, piercing cry, it launched itself into the stormy sky, soaring over the Pacific. Its silhouette grew smaller and smaller against the horizon, disappearing into the dark expanse of the night. The common monster watched as its companion vanished, its eyes gleaming with a sinister light. It roared into the tempest, the sound blending with the crashing thunder, a declaration of its newfound freedom. With a powerful leap, it plunged into the raging waters, its tail lashing from side to side, its hands and feet propelling it forward. For the first time, it tested its gills, reveling in the sensation of the ocean's embrace. The two creatures were now free, unleashed upon an unsuspecting world. No one was prepared for the terror that would follow, the nightmares that would soon become reality. The storm raged on, but the true tempest was only just beginning.